All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we're going to talk about something that is a little bit strange to me. Ring Magazine says that Terence Crawford is now the #1 ranked welterweight in the world over Errol Spence Jr., who holds 2 belts, after having beaten SHAWN Porter, somebody that Errol Spence Jr. already beat. Let's talk about what that means and the merits of that, vote or designation in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So this is probably going to be the last Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford video that I may do for a while. I'm still, basking in the glory of the very, very entertaining and fun fight that took place last weekend, a week ago from today, between Terence Crawford and SHAWN Porter. Terence Crawford knocks out SHAWN Porter in the 10th round of their fight, something that nobody else had done to SHAWN Porter, and secures his WBO belt. Now everybody, as they were doing before, was talking about whether or not and how there's going to be an Errol Spence Jr. fight. Personally, I love the conversation. I have a boxing channel to talk about boxing because I understand that the majority of what goes on about boxing is the back and forth barbershop type of conversations that you have. So I really appreciate you guys coming and, and contributing to the comment section and talking boxing with me. If you would not mind, and if you like the video, please watch the video all the way to the end and hit the like button if you like it. Also share the video, help the channel grow. Ring Magazine has made a decision that I don't really understand. Well, I understand it. I can understand their logic behind it. However, it kind of hits me funny. Terence Crawford, going into the fight with Errol Spence Jr., was the #2 rated welterweight in the division. And so he fights SHAWN Porter, somebody that Errol Spence Jr. already beat, and beats him. But now he passes up Errol Spence Jr. and becomes the #1 welterweight. Now Errol Spence Jr. is the #2 welterweight ranked by Ring. And it just kind of, I could understand the logic if they were saying, okay, Errol Spence Jr. has been inactive, and because he's inactive, we're going to either take him off the list or something like that, because, he hasn't fought, since he fought Danny Garcia. He had a retina injury, so, maybe they're taking that in consideration. But if to do it off the strength of the SHAWN Porter fight, for me, doesn't really make a lot of sense, because Terence Crawford beat a guy that Errol Spence Jr. already beat. And he beat him 2 years after Errol Spence Jr. had beaten him. He had only had 1 fight in between, so SHAWN Porter was a little inactive. So I don't really get putting Terence Crawford as the #1 welterweight. Now for me, even though I wouldn't do it, I can understand the logic. From this angle, I have Terence Crawford as my #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Although the Ring Magazine doesn't, I think that they have him listed a little bit further down, with Canelo Alvarez being #1. But I have Terence Crawford as my #1 guy, pound for pound. So if you're looking at, a pound for, who may have to be the more skilled fighter or all of that stuff, I could see how you may lean Terence Crawford. But Errol Spence Jr. has beaten the better fighters in that division, has beaten better fighters in the welterweight division than Terence Crawford has, by having beaten SHAWN Porter, having beaten Danny Garcia, having beaten Kell Brook when Kell Brook was, actually beating Kell Brook for his belt, beating SHAWN Porter for his belt. That would seem like that would carry a little bit more weight for me, and the fact that he's a unified champion. But to me, this kind of gets me. I used to get on Ring Magazine really, really heavy, but I don't do that as much anymore, because I do understand, now, more so that, there are different ways that you can look at there's different ways that, 2 people could look at the same situation. So I don't want to say that them doing that is egregious or ridiculous or anything like that. However, it does remind me a little bit of when Deontay Wilder fought Tyson Fury, and Tyson Fury, then they fought to a draw. Tyson Fury had not beaten anybody else in that division in several years, but they still put Tyson Fury ahead of Deontay Wilder in the heavyweight rankings. Now, and that's one of the reasons why I say, okay, man, I'm not going to get too much on them for this, because they wound up being right about that, because Tyson Fury wound up beating Deontay Wilder in the fight. In the fights that they wound up, actually in the next two fights that they had. So, now I do believe that the ring champion is Tyson Fury. Deontay Wilder, I think, is behind, if I recall correctly, is behind Alexander Usyk, maybe either at number 3 or number 4. Or actually, I think he may still be behind Anthony Joshua at number 4. So, Ring Magazine kind of makes some funny decisions in that regard. But unlike the Tyson Fury fight, where you could actually see that settled out in the ring, I'm not really too sure whether or not we're going to be able to see, who the top welterweight is, work itself out in the ring anytime soon. I get mixed messages from Terence Crawford about how important the fight with Errol Spence Jr. is for him. His pay-per-views, and I know a lot of people don't like to talk about the pay-per-view numbers and all of that stuff and kind of say, hey, what difference that should make? We as fans shouldn't be talking about. Look, man, don't tell me what I can talk about, what I can't talk about, when I'm really trying to analyze whether or not we're going to get to see the fight at all. Because, there's one thing talking about who's going to win the fight, but there's also the reality of whether or not we're going to see the fight and when we're going to see the fight and the things that may hold up that fight. And the thing that is really holding up the fight, I do believe, is the fact that Terence Crawford has not been promoted right by Top Rank. He is not, and the numbers for that Shawn Porter fight really, really reflect that, having come in somewhere between 190 and 135. I've heard as low as 130,000 pay-per-view buys. I've heard as high as 190. Ring Magazine reported 135,000 pay-per-views. And Terence Crawford is going to want to get paid for that fight, just similar to the way that Leonard Ellerbe, when he talked about a fight taking place between Devin Haney and Gervonta Davis, and Gervonta Davis and Teofimo Lopez, saying, look, these guys are going to want to get paid for that fight. They're not going to, when they fight Gervonta Davis, they're going to want a career high payday for that fight. And they very well may want the fight, but until they get their numbers up and the people that are making the fight for Gervonta Davis feel comfortable enough with taking the gamble of paying these guys that money, it's going to be harder to make that fight. So that's pretty much what happened with Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. I believe that Errol Spence Jr. wants that fight. Terence Crawford wants a fight. But, with those numbers that Terence Crawford brought in and his desire to make a good amount of money, which I don't disagree with, because, hey, man, they're both risking a lot in that fight. I just don't know if we're going to be able to see how that pans out. And we may be just guessing at who the number 1 and the number 2 welterweight is. But, as far as the skills, who the number 1 welterweight is, that's up for debate. Terence Crawford has been there for several years. He's won all of his defenses by knockout. Errol Spence Jr., has not been on a knockout streak as well. So, there's also the possibility that they could weigh that in. But as far as who the number 1 welterweight is, as far as, putting butts in the seat and all of that stuff, obviously, man, that is going to be Errol Spence Jr. And in that state, the difference between the two may actually be what keeps us from ever really knowing who the best is in the ring. I hope that doesn't come out to be the situation. And there's things that Terence Crawford can do to make that happen. Like, I think fighting with the PBC, if he could get a sucker match with Adrian Bronner, and then Keith Thurman to build up his pay-per-view numbers on a network that is better at selling them than Top Rank, than ESPN is, then I think we could very well see that fight. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. I would have Errol Spence Jr. as the number 1 welterweight, but at the same time, I can understand why those guys would think that and why they would vote that way. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And thank you very much for supporting the channel. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, hit the bell icon for the notifications, all that good stuff. And with that, I'm out. Peace.